Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. And for those who are joining us virtually, if I could speak to the camera, if that's okay, for the folks that are here live, we hope to see you someday. We miss you. And for folks like Pastor Yacht and Linda, I just want you to know that we're supportive of you, and our thoughts are with you right now. We wish you could be with us. We wish all of you could be with us, but that will happen hopefully someday. Anyways, as we have our message today, I'm grateful to be here with you. I think the last time I was here was back in July, and that was right before, like, July 4th. And so now it's the day before Labor Day. So I seem to come at a timely moment when we have holidays. And you've heard me talk here on Labor Day before, explaining how Labor Day first started, all that kind of stuff. It was instituted as a push by by unions at the time, back in the 1880s, where they wanted to celebrate the American worker. And as I think about today and Labor Day, it takes on a different meaning for me, because I retired back in July. I think I might have told you that. And one of the things that I've observed, I've had time to reflect on what actually are the different concepts of work. Because when I started working, I always thought work was just a means to an end. And, as I left, that's what I thought. But, I'm finding out there is also a concept that work is your life as well. Right before I left, the chairman of the company that I worked for had shared his view. Basically, he was saying, work should be any time. It should be on Sundays and nighttime and anytime. You shouldn't feel work is a separate activity, and that you can work anytime you want or not work anytime you want. And I growing up and working for as long as I have, that just didn't sit well with me. But that's actually the concept now, is that work should be somehow integrated with life. And as I think about that, I wonder if that also, first of all, is biblical. I mean, if you think about the 7 days, 6 days of creation, God rested. It was very compartmentalized. Okay, so I don't know if that necessarily is a biblical view of work, that it's all integrated as part of our life. Maybe it is. I don't want to say it's not, but I have a hard time grasping that. And why it struck me so much this morning is all the conversations I've had in the last few days with people, and hearing how people take their work so seriously. Maybe I should have, and I didn't. Like I said, I saw it as a means to an end. But when I read, as MK alluded to, the news today. I don't know if you saw the news today. There's a guy who's the chief financial officer of Bed Bath & Beyond. He apparently jumped off of the building, and committed suicide, is what it looks like. They don't know what actually happened. They just said he jumped off the building and died. And for those of you who know, Bed Bath & Beyond haven't been doing very well financially, okay? And they're closing, I think it was 150 stores. And I'd say to myself, on the eve of Labor Day, do we take work too seriously? Is work really what defines us? And so today's message really is looking at being destined to follow. But it also, inside there, is this concept of work and how we view it. And so my hope is I invite you in to be able to see that as I try to share with you today's message. Last, I guess it was 2 months ago in July, I spoke on destined to reach the unreachable. And it was talking about Zacchaeus, if you recall. And I gave some examples of folks that we thought were unreachable that eventually became Christ followers. Well, today, Jesus goes in a different direction. Okay, after you see the Zacchaeus account, he tells a story because they're getting really close to Jerusalem. And he's worried about something. You ever have one of those situations where, people are clearly not getting what you're saying, and you don't want to just correct them, so you tell a story. I wonder if that's actually what Jesus does And I invite you in to look at Luke chapter 19, verses 11 through 28. You know, I gave you notes. You can fill those out. But if you notice, and this is what I observed, because I think my son warned me of this, is sometimes this QR code's too far away for you to be able to see. So I did something, what I thought was clever, was if you flip to the back page of that handout, I actually put the QR code there. So it's close for you to be able to scan and see the notes all filled in. That's really if you don't want to fill in notes, or you're running behind and you can't fill them in, but I invite you to join us either way, whether you fill in the notes or just look at it virtually. As we go into Luke chapter 19, it really picks up on verse 11 and then continues through there. So allow me to read it. And as I read it, I'm going to offer commentary along the way. While they were listening to this, he went on to tell them a parable. Because it was near Jerusalem, and the people thought that the kingdom of God was going to appear all at once. He said, "A man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king, and then to return. So he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas." Now, almost immediately, your thought is that, oh, okay, this is the Matthew 25 story about talents. So let me point out, these aren't talents here. These are minas. Okay, I'll explain what a mina is. And you notice there weren't 3 servants. There were 10 servants that are listed here. Let me make that note right now. So let's put this money to work, he said, until I come back. But his subjects hated him. We don't get that kind of commentary in Matthew chapter 25 about the parable of talents, that how they felt about the master. Okay, and in this case, he wasn't a master. If you saw in the previous slide, he was going to be appointed as king. Subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, "We don't want this man to be our king." Okay, so apparently they had some type of movement to say, hey, let's elect someone else. Don't elect this guy as our king. But he was made king, however, and returned home. Then he sent for the servants to whom he had given the money. Remember, there were 10 of them, okay? In order to find out what they had gained with it. The first one came and said, "Sir, your mina has earned 10 more. Automatically, again, our mind goes to the parable of talents. But this actually isn't the parable of talents. "Well done, my good servant," his master replied. "Because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter, you take charge of 10 cities. Okay, and I highlight the 10 cities. If you recall the parable of talents, what did they give them? More talents, right? The second came and said, "Sir, your mina has earned 5 more. What's this guy get?" His master answered, "You take charge of 5 cities. Then another servant came and said," story sure sounds familiar, doesn't it? "Sir, here is your mina. I have kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you because you are a hard man." And this is the part that I've had to read over and over, and I still don't fully get it. So allow me to give you my interpretation of what he's saying. In here it says, "You take out what you did not put in, and you reap what you did not sow." His master replied, "I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I did not sow?" When I looked at commentaries, it's like, what does he actually mean here? So allow me to give you my interpretation, and you can always check it on your own and do your own research. You know, if I were to put this in today's context, I wonder if this guy, who was the servant, who buried his stuff, which actually isn't uncommon during that time, that they would just bury their stuff. But it's also unproductive as well. It doesn't gain anything by burying it. But one I wonder is, this guy, as much as it says, "Oh, I feared you," I don't think he did. I don't think he feared this king at all. As a matter of fact, I wonder if he represents a lot of the common workers that we see today. Where, and I'll admit, there's some thought that I also have, you know, working all the many years that I've had, where it's like, well, I don't respect my boss, okay, is essentially what he's saying. And almost in a ways, he mocks him. He says, you know, you as the top guy, the king, leader, manager, whatever you are, you know, I saw you're a hard man. You don't actually do anything around here. And it's us people that actually sow and make all this happen. And I wonder if the king was so insulted by what he says. He goes, let me show you. You think I don't do anything? Let me show you what I do. And I wonder if that's actually the attitude that is here. Because if you look at what happened earlier in this passage, they didn't want him to be king. In fact, they hated him. They hated him because he made them work. As I said, there's going to be some themes interwoven in here about the whole concept of work. And I wonder what actually is happening here. Is that there was this king, and he became a king. You know, if you think about it in our context today, it'd be almost as if this guy was like a manager, and they elevated him to director or CEO or something like that. It's almost the same kind of thing that we're seeing here. And I wonder if what happens is he had a certain work ethic that he was able to train these other folks, and he was, in a sense, allowing them an opportunity, almost as like an internship that you see in today's world. Let me close out this passage where it says, why then didn't you put my money on deposit? Okay, why didn't you take some risks? Why didn't you do what I've been training you to do all this time? So that when I came back, I could have collected it with interest. Then he said to those standing by, take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. Okay, now remember, he's got 10 minas, okay, in addition to 10 minas. Now he's got 11, and he also has 10 cities as well. Sir, they said, he's already got 10. He replied, I tell you that to everyone who has more, more will be given. But as for the one who has nothing, even what he has will be taken away. I think there's a concept here, and I'll explain what I wonder if the concept is. But before I do, let me finish out the story. But those enemies of mine, who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. Here's a couple observations that I make as I look at this passage. And by the way, as you're looking at the slide, in the upper right corner, that's a mina. Okay? Now I know many of us want to call it Mina, because we know of people that are actually named Mina, like Michael Mina. He's the famous chef that I think has a restaurant in San Jose. But it's actually, if you look at the pronunciation, it actually is Mina. Okay? A mina is roughly in our day about $60. Okay, that's how much the value of a mina is. So with that in mind, let me just proceed. First of all, as I tried to point out, this isn't a parable of talents. Most of us think that this is just, it sounds the same, right? You know, and so maybe maybe the theme and what the lesson that Jesus was trying to get across is the same. Most of us think of the parable of talents. We think, oh, you know, it's the parable or the lesson that Jesus is trying to tell them is to be able to be sure to use the 3 T's: your time, talent, your treasure for God. Okay, and it's the lesson that we call stewardship. I don't know if this lesson is necessarily stewardship, and I'll invite you to consider what I think it is. But then the thing that I noticed different about this story is, whereas in the parable of talents, there was a guy who was a master and there were 3 servants. Okay? In this case, there's a king. And not only does it say that there's a king, but there's a king that's rejected as well. So they didn't want to, there were people there that didn't want to do what the king was advocating for them to do. Jesus is also, and this actually parallels the whole idea that who do we often refer to as king? Jesus. Okay, so in a sense, he's interjecting himself into the story. And so as you read that story more and more, you start to see what uncovers is what Jesus had for them to do when he was gone. Jesus is trying to warn them that his future return, it's not going to happen right away. I wonder if the disciples were saying, okay, finally we get to Jerusalem. The story is over. Jesus becomes king. We've done our job. And in ways, Jesus was saying, no. Your job is just starting. It's not the end. And then finally, as we see what that job is, what we see is the rewards of that job are dependent on their ability to be disciples. and to make disciples. So allow me to be able to share with you this. I wonder if the mina that we're seeing here is actually talking about the concept of us investing in somebody else, which we call discipleship. Makes sense. If you think about the Great Commission, right? What is the charge of the church to do? It's to make disciples. And so I wonder if what Jesus was trying to say to them, if I can offer it in plain language, is I'm not going to come right away because I want to see how you can make disciples. And so I'm giving you a process, mirror this story, and figure out a way how to make disciples. I wonder if that's what the story is. So it's not necessarily about talents or stewardship. It's actually about discipleship. Well, what is discipleship as we think about it? And so many of you have been to messages where the preacher would often talk about the four L's or the 4 M's, or they make it after the word joy or something like that. They call that alliteration. Okay, and so as I was reading this passage and thinking all these thoughts, I came up with the 4 P's and the 4 R's. Okay, and so if you're wondering, what's this message going to end up being? It's basically the 4 P's and the 4 R's. The 4 P's on the first part of the page, the 4 R's, because I didn't have a chance to print them. I printed them on the back side of that handout that you have. Well, the 4 P's are these. First of all, it's the principles of discipleship. So what it really is discipleship? I think it breaks down, according to this passage, into these 4 P's. It's first of all, the practice of discipleship. Did you notice that in there, what the king asked them to do? He said, put this money to work, okay? And up before that point, the servants, for the most part, didn't like him because he was asking them to do hard things, which is why I have written down here, practicing discipleship, isn't it? For those of us who have been Christians for a long time, practicing discipleship is doing unpopular but necessary things. He asked them to do basically hard things. Now, for most of us, my hope is that your concept of discipleship will change after today, because often we think of discipleship as a program. Somebody gets saved, you give them these 4 books that they call navigators books. For those of you who go way back with me, and they finish the 4 books, you're done, okay? And you've all of a sudden made them into a disciple. And my hope is that you rethink or reframe how discipleship is all about, based on what we see in the story today. So what is really discipleship? If you were to think of this, what Jesus was asking them to do, I think he was trying to ask them to do this. He was trying to ask them, you, as a mina, you invest in somebody else. You increase their spiritual value such that you have them invest in someone, and therefore, in turn, increase their spiritual value. If you think about what discipleship is, that's really what it's about. If all of us did that, well, we'd have God's kingdom, God's church would be overflowing. And so, often we complicate things such that we don't go back to what Jesus said in the original story. I mean, basically, that's what he's saying when he's putting the word. It's hard. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it all the time. But this is what I asked you to do. The second principle that I see that we observe in this story is the penalty due to the lack of discipleship. It's probably we don't disciple well, probably because we don't think of what the consequence would be to us personally. Notice what Jesus shares in this story. If we were, again, to look at it from the perspective of discipleship, is that the penalty due to the lack of discipleship is this. The opportunity was given to somebody else. It was given to somebody else to then cultivate that mina, is what we see. So the penalty of when we fail to disciple is basically our opportunities are given to somebody else. The next thing then we see is this, is the promise of all-out discipleship. If we were to dedicate ourselves today to saying, I'm going to reframe the way that I view discipleship, and I'm going to encourage my church, the circle of folks that are around me, to be able to say, let's look at discipleship in a different way. This is really what Jesus in his story promises. And is that the promise is this, it's exponential, the rewards we get from discipleship. You know, for the little that many of us can think about, that one person that made a change in our life, that allowed us to be here today, you know, and I wonder how that one person, the little that they did, has changed other people's lives as well. But I wanted you to really take note of this, is that the exponential reward that's in this story is big. And so I wonder if we're missing the point of our discipleship can produce exponential rewards. Because as I said, the mina is $60. Okay, he's got 10 of them. So basically, he has now $600, right? Okay, and then what's more is they gave him 10 cities. I looked up what the average, just so that we can have it in context, how much a city is worth. So you add up all the real estate, you know, you think of the average city in the U.S. Apparently, the average city in the U.S. is worth $120 billion. Okay, if you buy up all the property and everything else. Okay, San Ramon, Danville, you guys are more, probably. Okay, so you know, it's roughly $120 billion. So the fact that this guy has now 10 cities, that's basically $1.2 trillion. Okay, for those of you who don't know, I think like the national deficit is like $1 trillion. Okay, so that we're talking about a lot of money. Okay, is what. So this guy not only gets $600, he gets that one mina, which is $660, and he gets $1.2 trillion. And basically, he's in charge of $1.2 trillion. And I don't think we take that seriously enough. It's not like him being the mayor. I mean, this guy, he could do whatever he wants. He could sell everybody's land, kick everybody out, and take all the money. You know, that's all his. And so I wonder if Jesus was trying to make this so outrageous of a story. The reward for discipleship is that, you know, your ability to invest this little bit is going to be really big in the future. And then finally this, that we see as the principle of discipleship, is the propagation, meaning when you multiply disciples. I don't know, many of you, I'm sure many of you were around or watched TV at the time. I mean, there was a commercial about, it was a shampoo. I don't even remember which shampoo it was. And what happens is they show this lady on there, and she goes, and they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and so on, and so on, and so on. And there's this big grid of all these women, right? You know, who also know this. You know, and I wonder if that's actually what Jesus is referring to in terms of propagation. Is that when they tell two, that they tell two, it just multiplies, right? That is the concept we know of multiplication. I wanted you to notice, though, in this multiplication, did you notice he only talked to 3 servants? How many were there in the beginning that he charged with minas? 10. This is a different story again from the parable of the talents. Okay, so he singles out these 3. What do you think the other 7 are doing during this time? Why doesn't he continue the story to tell? I mean, if all of us were disciples there, we'd say, Jesus, what happened to the 7? Okay, and I wonder if he leaves it hanging there for a reason. Those 7 were to see what happened to those 3, right? If you're one of the 7, you saw what happened to those 3, you're like, oh, I'm going to go back to work. I'm going to have to figure this one out now. Okay, and so he almost uses those 3 as an example to what the 7 are supposed to do. The 3 servants define how the remaining 7 should follow. Good disciples, then, I think the concept then that I take away from it, that I wonder is in this story, is that good disciples observe good disciples. No matter what work you did, no matter what kind of family relationship you had, isn't it always you look, or what kind of athlete you might have been, don't you look at good models to be able to figure out what you want to do? Well, why don't we apply that same concept to disciples? If we look at good disciples, if we want to be a good disciple, we should observe what good disciples do. And I wonder that's the concept that he was trying to get across as one of the principles of discipleship. So let me share with you this. Where are we at with all this? How can we be the discipler that Jesus wants us to be based on the story that we see? I think there's actually 4 things, and these are my 4 R's. You have to flip the page on the other side of the handout to be able to fill these in. I think the first R that we see, and this is just life. This is what I've just learned in life in general, but what is also being advocated in many workplaces is routine and discipline. If there's something that I've learned in life, it's this. It's that you gotta have a routine. If you want to develop good habits, you gotta have a cue and you gotta have a reward. And in many ways, that all starts with having a routine. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, if we want to be the discipler that Jesus wants us to be, is how are my habits? What are the things that I'm doing that are actually presenting discipline and routine in my own life? The next thing I wonder is restraint. I was talking with some of my family members the other day, and they were saying how their parents will say stuff that is like unfiltered. And I was trying to tell them it's because as we get older, we find our filter starts to dissolve. Okay, so we just say stuff, right? And we don't even know what, we don't even think about what the consequences are. But how are we doing in that area? Showing restraint. How is my self-control? When I say something, do I think what the implications would be? The next R is this, do we think in terms of our life and our development, our personal development, as what is the return on investment? How are my relationships? How am I investing in those relationships? Are the relationships that I'm investing in maybe ones that I shouldn't? For those of you who have any kind of financial portfolio, you know the best way to manage your portfolio is to diversify. Okay? But also to know that if you're riding on a bad investment, you need to make a change. You can't just keep it forever. Okay? And I wonder if we treat our life that way, the relationships that we have. Are there certain relationships that maybe we need to cut off because they're actually losing for us and not beneficial for the other party? And then finally, I wonder in our own personal development, are we considering reproduction? As we develop and try to be that discipler, is what are we doing to reproduce ourselves? I like, and allow me to interject a Golden State Warrior quote, since they were the champions last season. And it was a quote that Draymond Green had said many years ago that was given to him, or that was charged to him by the general manager, Bob Myers. He says, your job is to be able to give somebody else your job. Okay, and it was something to that effect. Okay, and I wonder, what are we doing to be able to set other people up to do what we can do now? Who am I passing on my spiritual values to? So as we consider those things, I just wanted to let you know that as I was trying to think through all these things and Jesus' story, I came across this book on my bookshelf. And it's called Transforming Discipleship by Greg Ogden. And for as long as I've been a Christian, I've never looked at discipleship this way. And so this is where I would invite you, if you're trying to reevaluate or reframe discipleship within your circle of community or your church or other organization, I think this book would help you out. Because he looks at it this way. He says, a lot of times when we talk about discipling, it's one-on-one, right? He's saying maybe what we need to think about when we talk about discipling is 1-on-2. Okay, because a lot of times, and I've had this happen, right? You disciple a person, and all of a sudden they stop coming to church. Okay, and it's like you just failed. Okay, by you discipling 2 people rather than 1 person at a time, what you're doing is you're allowing those 2 people to hold each other accountable. And if for some reason one does fail, at least you have somebody else that you've invested into. So rather than having that coffee meeting that you often used to have to go through the Navigator's workbook, with the 1 person, you take along 2 people instead of 1 person. okay, that you would disciple. Interesting concept, so simple, never even thought of it before. And then the next thing is life investment. Remember how I said that it's also, our investment of time is just like your portfolio? It was actually a pastor that used to come here, Pastor Alvin Louis. He's now in Texas, for those of you who didn't know. And one of the things he had told me early on about mentoring other pastors, he said, Dave, you got to be able to set a finite time, okay, for them I'm going to disciple them for 6 months or 1 year or whatever it might be, but there's got to be a finite time. And I wonder, and why? Because it's the same thing. It's like your investments. You have your investment. If all of a sudden your portfolio starts to, the market is doing different, you're going to have to somehow pull out of that and invest in something else. Do we ever think about that in terms of our own investment of time with other people? Are there certain relationships that we need to be able to very clearly define? This is how long I'm going to disciple you for. This is how long it's going to take. And my hope is that you make this kind of progression. The next thing then that is also introduced in this book is this whole idea of generational multiplication. What does that mean? That means, often we disciple people, they're our age, okay? Or they're within the scope of our age, okay? But, it's like, have we ever thought, maybe I need to be discipling people that are next generation down, or maybe 2 generations down from what I am now. And that's what he's talking about. The way that we multiply is we do it through generational multiplication. I see this often in churches, even the church where I was my home church, where I was the administrative pastor. It's often people, when they ask for help, or involve people in ministry, it's always people their age. And when you ask them, well, can you choose someone younger? That may, oh no, they're too young. Right? They'll never be able to commit. But I think we need to be more intentional in trying to reach down and help those folks that are the generation below us or 2 generations, even if it means allowing them to make mistakes. And then the last thing is this whole concept of transformation. Isn't that what we see in Romans chapter 12? Is that it's an overall transformation. Are we gauging the life change that happens in a person? And how do we do that? We do that by building trust, right? And allowing them to be able to share with us and us be able to share with them. We do that by instilling biblical principles of truth. We do that by also holding them accountable. What accountability means is, if you don't come through, then I'm going to have to be able to move on to somebody else. So as we consider those thoughts, I know it's a big matrix. I close with this whole, and I'll walk you through each one. So either you can start writing them down, or just scan the QR code and you'll see all the answers in there. But as I look at this makes so much sense, and I never thought of it. Has you ever thought of what Jesus was actually doing? You ever wonder in our workplace why people can't succeed well? Often you see situations where, and this is the part that I always wonder, is why do they always seem to get a leader that's outside the organization to come into a particular position? We do that in industry. We do that in church too. Why can't we disciple them up from the bottom? Is what I always have always been disillusioned about. Because if you look at it, that's what Jesus did. If you think of the different stages that Jesus went through in terms of discipleship, this makes a lot of sense. Jesus started, remember, before they even became disciples, he started by inviting them in, right? And then in stage 1, if you want to categorize it that way, right? He lived out life for them, or in front of them, right? He was that living example that they had. So all they did was just watch him. Okay, if you recall in the beginning, that was stage 1. Then in stage 2, what happens? He started teaching them. He became and how did he teach them? He taught them through stories. And they asked questions, and he was able to answer them. He was the provocative teacher. In stage 3, what happened? He became the supportive coach. Remember early on, I want to say Acts chapter 10, Luke chapter 10, around there. Remember he sent them out, the sending of the 72, and so you see, right? He was basically coaching them. He was giving them short-term assignments on which they were to perform, and basically testing them. Okay. In stage 4, what ended up happening? In stage 4 of discipleship, he became the ultimate delegator. Now I get it. We're not Jesus, okay? But there are things that we do that we need to pass on to others. Whether you're a dad or a mom and you need to pass something on to your kids, or whether you're a boss in some type of organization, or whether you're a deacon or an elder or whatever it might be, there are things that you can pass on. And have we looked as intentionally as this as to how do we disciple someone else? What stage are they at that we need to be in to be able to do what, to get them to the next stage? Now let's also look, now that we've looked at the Jesus side of it, the leader side, let's look at the follower side, the disciple, the protege, as they call it, right? He starts off as the seeker, right? Before, in the pre-disciple stage, starts off as a seeker. In stage 1, what is he doing? He's observing and he's imitating. Okay, and so after a while, then he moves to stage 2. That's when he starts to ask good questions. If you're discipling someone and all they're doing is saying yeah, and they're not asking questions, you're not teaching them. That's one thing that I've learned, if I've learned anything in my career. Then in stage 3, what happens is that's when you send them out to test on their own. That's what the king was doing. He sent these guys out with a mina to be able to figure out what they can possibly do. Did they actually learn and apply the things that the king had taught them? That works in the context of church as, some small project or short-term mission, or as an intern. Those are opportunities that help them develop in stage 3 discipleship to finally getting to the point of stage 4. So you can see, just looking at these different stages, if I can be so bold to be able to say it this way, Jesus was saying, well, I'm not coming yet. This is not the end. You guys got to figure this process out. And for over 2,000 years, this is the kind of thing that needs to happen before I come again. It's almost as if he's saying. Now, what do we look for? Especially for those of us who are leaders, and we're trying to look for people that would be this person, that would be the disciple, is I think we're looking for people that are hungry and exploring. Maybe we're not giving them the context so they can be hungry and exploring. Then in stage 2, do you have someone that says, hey, why don't you sit with me and observe? When I was in one of the churches I was in, actually my home church, I was put in charge of one of the worship services. And it was all high schoolers in there. And I thought, what a great opportunity. And so what I had them do was there was an AV guy, kind of like what Derek's doing. Is that I would bring along a young guy who would always peer at the board, kind of try to figure out what's all those dials and stuff that are back there. So I said, here, why don't you sit with the guy that's experienced and watch? And for months, this guy would just watch what he did. What ended up happening is that after a while, he would get to stage 2. He's like, what's that button for? What did you do when this came on? And over time, it came to a point where the guy that was the AV guy said, oh, I'm going on vacation. I won't be here. Why don't you take over? And so we were able to develop it in such a way that he was ready and willing to try. And then it got to a point where he was able to assume full responsibility for reproduction and be able to teach then one of his buddies how to do it. That's the type of state, but do we ever think of discipleship in that way? And my hope is that what you would do is just take this away and just ruminate for a while on how this could possibly reframe how we think about leadership development, discipleship, all these kinds of things. I think there's something here, But it really started, hopefully you saw it, it really started with those minas. If we think of those minas as us investing in people, this is the power that happens from it. Well, I want to close with, what are some of the things that we can do, that we can engage other people? And so I've listed a few things, that I've tried to do over the years. Is, I got a young man that loves to meet with me every so often, and I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to say, can we meet two at a time instead of just you, kind of thing. And we'd often meet for coffee or something like that, or lunch, or walking. How can we possibly use these as in the course of our day to be able to disciple someone else? If you're still working, if there's break times, that you can get together with others, or a virtual Zoom or Hangout. That seems to be more possible today. And so I'm throwing these out as a smattering of things that we probably do in our everyday, and we never think of, oh, well, I'm meeting with so-and-so. Well, maybe I can meet with two people instead of one person. Maybe I can meet with someone that is one generation below or two generations below. So I'm hoping that this sparks some ideas of how we can be better disciplers to others. As we close, I appreciate MK coming up with the songs. Take My Life, I Surrender, all popular songs that I remember. And as you think about this is us investing our life to God. But what is he asking in the story that we see? How do we then also invest our lives into somebody else? Let's close in a word of prayer. Our God, we thank you for this time that we can study your word. I pray, Lord, that maybe it's not all connecting for our folks today. It wasn't, I'll be honest, it wasn't so much for me either. But I think this calls us to say we need to disciple more, better, more expansive, in a way that maybe we haven't thought of before. And as we unpack the story of what we see with Jesus telling the story of the king and the mina, my hope is that it reminds our folks that there are things that we can do here and now to reframe the way that we can invest our lives into someone else. And really, this is all about you invested in us. And there were people that invested in us. And this is our chance to be able to invest in somebody else. So God, I pray that your word would be able to take hold today. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.